There are moments in history that nobody plans for. Moments that arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary mornings, and then suddenly everything shifts. This was one of those mornings. I was standing near the Victoria Memorial when it happened. Not because I was looking for anything unusual. I was just there, the way you sometimes end up in a place with no particular reason, just habit maybe, or the pull of somewhere familiar. I'd walked past Buckingham Palace more times than I could count. I knew its rhythms, the changing of the guard, the tourists bunching together at the iron railings, phones raised, the pigeons, the slow, practiced stillness of the men in bearskin hats. It was a Tuesday in late autumn. That specific kind of cold that doesn't announce itself, it just settles into your coat and stays there. The sky was flat and pale, not gray exactly, more the color of old paper, the kind of morning that feels like it's holding its breath. There was a modest crowd already gathered. Maybe 60, 70 people stretched along the railings. A school group off to the left, children in matching jackets, a harassed teacher counting heads. A Japanese couple sharing a thermos of something hot, steam curling between them. An older man in a tweed coat standing completely alone, hands clasped behind his back, watching the palace with the focused attention of someone who had been watching it for years. I'd noticed the guard earlier. Not because he was doing anything wrong. He was doing everything right, in fact, standing exactly where he was supposed to stand, back straight, eyes fixed on the middle distance. The rifle held at the exact regulation angle, but there was something about him, a quality of stillness that was different from the usual ceremonial blankness, not absent, present, very present. His name, I would later learn, was Corporal Marcus Bellew, 29 years old, third-generation military. His grandfather had served at the palace in the 1970s. His father had done 2 tours in Afghanistan. Marcus had joined the household division at 22 and had spent the last 7 years accumulating the kind of quiet distinction that doesn't make headlines, commendations. Yes, but the internal kind. The kind noted in files and forgotten by everyone, except those who write the files. I didn't know any of that while I was watching him. I just knew something felt different. It started with the van. A media van had pulled up on the far side of the road. Nothing unusual about that. There were often photographers near the palace, especially during periods of royal news. And there had been a great deal of royal news lately. The previous week, a leaked internal document had circulated through British media suggesting that senior advisors within the palace were considering a formal review of Camilla's title. Her full designation as Queen Consort had, in certain quarters, been the subject of ongoing debate since the coronation. Whether the leak was deliberate, accidental, or manufactured was unclear, but it had caused a stir, the kind of stir that doesn't settle quickly. Reporters had questions, the public had opinions, and someone somewhere had decided that the palace gates were the right place to ask those questions and express those opinions. A small group had assembled near the media van, maybe a dozen people, a mix of what looked like journalists and what looked like organized protesters, the kind you can identify not by anger but by preparation. They had signs, printed rather than hand-lettered, which suggested coordination. The signs were polite but pointed. One read, "Her title was promised to be different." Another, "The people's voice matters." A third, smaller one that a young woman was holding slightly apologetically, as though she wasn't entirely sure she agreed with it herself. "Honor the commitment." They weren't shouting. They weren't blocking anything. They were simply there, making their presence known, which is a perfectly legal thing to do in that part of London. The police were aware of them. 2 officers stood nearby, relaxed, hands behind their backs, monitoring without intervening. Nothing about this was particularly unusual for the modern era of royal public relations. What happened next was, a woman in a dark overcoat approached the railings near where Corporal Bellew was posted. She wasn't part of the protest group. She seemed to be a journalist, or at least a content creator of some kind. She had that particular confidence of someone accustomed to putting herself in front of a camera. She held a phone at arm's length, filming herself, and she positioned herself close to the guard in the way that some people do, testing the edges of what's permitted, trying to manufacture a moment. She began speaking to her phone. I couldn't catch all of it from where I was standing, but the gist was clear enough. She was making a commentary about Camilla's title, about the promises made before Charles and Camilla married, specifically the understanding, communicated to the public in 2005, that Camilla would use the title princess consort rather than queen consort. She was framing the question as one of institutional honesty, whether the palace had misled the public, whether the monarchy owed people an explanation. She turned to Bellu, not to threaten or provoke, just with the casual entitlement of someone who assumes public spaces are their studio. "Do you think," she said, loud enough now that the people nearest the railings could hear, "that the palace has an obligation to explain the title change to ordinary British people?" Silence. That's what guards do. They are trained for exactly this. The silence isn't rudeness, it's discipline. It's the studied non-response that protects them, the institution, and the entire choreography of royal ceremony from becoming entangled in the messiness of opinion. Corporal Bellu said nothing. The woman pressed, "You must have views, you serve the crown, doesn't that give you a stake in this?" Still nothing. She turned back to her phone, made a comment about the guard's silence being symbolic of the institution's refusal to engage, and began to move away. That's when it happened. What Corporal Bellu did next was so small, so technically within the realm of ambiguity, that I spent several minutes afterward convincing myself I hadn't imagined it. He spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically. In the flat, even tone of a man who has measured what he is about to say very carefully and decided to say it anyway. "The commitment was made to the public," he said. "That's all." 4 words that weren't really 4 words. They were a position. A quiet, contained, entirely unprecedented position, spoken by a man in uniform who, by every regulation and tradition and unspoken rule of his role, was not supposed to have positions. Not in public, not within earshot of cameras, not ever. The woman stopped walking. She turned back slowly. The people nearby went very still. The kind of collective stillness that happens when something occurs that doesn't quite fit the established order of things, and everyone present simultaneously realizes it. The older man in the tweed coat tilted his head. The teacher with the school group glanced over, distracted from her head count. The Japanese couple lowered their thermos. Corporal Bellu had not broken his ceremonial posture. He was still standing exactly as he had been, eyes forward. Rifle correct, every external marker of the performing automaton still in place. But the words were out there now, hanging in the cold autumn air, and they couldn't be put back. The journalist, because she was a journalist, I confirmed this later, didn't rush. She had the instincts of someone who knows when to let a moment breathe. She raised her phone again, not intrusively, just resettling it. "Can you say anything else?" she asked. He didn't respond. Whatever door had briefly opened had closed. The professional silence returned. But the damage, if damage was the right word, was done. Within about 90 seconds, 2 things happened simultaneously. First, one of the police officers who had been monitoring the protest group drifted casually in the direction of the journalist and, in the polite but firm manner of British law enforcement, suggested she give the guard more room. Second, a palace aide, or someone who looked like a palace aide, dark suit, security lanyard, the kind of urgent purposefulness that comes with proximity to institutions, appeared from the side entrance and walked briskly to the officer near Bellu's post. A short, quiet exchange. The aide looked once at Bellu. Bellu looked at nothing. The aide left. In the crowd, people were already typing on their phones. I watched 3 people within my eyeline raise their devices. It would be on social media within minutes. It would be in the news within the hour. By evening, it would be a talking point on every royal commentary program in the country. I stood there a little longer watching Corporal Bellu stand exactly as he'd been standing before any of it happened. Back straight, eyes fixed on that middle-distance point. But something about the quality of his stillness had changed. It wasn't the stillness of performance anymore. It was the stillness of a man who has just done something he cannot undo and has chosen, with full awareness, to remain exactly where he is. There's a particular kind of courage in that, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself with gestures or declarations. Just 4 words, just the truth as he understood it, just a commitment that had been made and a man who thought it shouldn't be quietly forgotten. By the following morning, Corporal Marcus Bellu had been placed on administrative reassignment, pending a formal internal review. The Ministry of Defense issued a brief statement confirming that serving members of the Household Division were prohibited from making public statements on matters of royal policy, and that the matter was being addressed through appropriate channels. The palace said nothing directly. They rarely do. The journalist's footage, 9 seconds of it, just the relevant exchange, had been viewed 3 million times by the time the Modi statement was released. The comments underneath were the predictable mixture of outrage, admiration, conspiracy, and comedy that attaches itself to anything royal that breaks from script. But beneath the noise, if you read carefully, there was a thread that kept appearing. Ordinary people, not especially passionate about the monarchy one way or another, writing some version of the same thing. He said what a lot of us were thinking. The debate about Camilla's title is a complicated one, and this isn't the place to relitigate it. In 2005, when Charles and Camilla married, Clarence House issued a statement indicating that Camilla would use the title Princess Consort. That statement was widely understood as a concession to public sentiment. Camilla's role in the end of Charles and Diana's marriage had made her a difficult figure for many. When Charles became king in September 2022, Camilla became Queen Consort, and eventually, per Charles's own wishes, Queen. The earlier commitment was quietly set aside. Whether that was the right decision is genuinely debatable. Monarchy evolves, titles are not contracts, circumstances change. There are thoughtful people on every side of the question. But Corporal Bellew wasn't making a legal argument or a political one. He was making a human one. The commitment was made to the public. He wasn't saying the decision was wrong. He wasn't demanding anything. He was simply noting that something had been said and that the people it was said to hadn't stopped existing. That's a different thing, and it landed differently. I went back to the Victoria Memorial the next morning. Different weather, softer, with thin winter sunlight slanting through the trees along the mall. Different crowd. Different guard on duty, standing exactly where Bellew had stood, performing the same careful stillness. It looked exactly the same. That's the thing about institutions. They absorb. They close over the shape of what happened and resume the surface. The stones don't record it. The railings don't remember. The ceremony continues because the ceremony is the point, not any individual within it, not any single mourning, not any brief interruption in the script. And yet, I kept thinking about that tweed-coated man I'd noticed in the crowd. He was back again in the same spot, watching the palace with the same focused attention. I walked over and stood near him for a moment, which felt like the right thing to do without quite knowing why. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the gates. After a while he said, quietly, 53 years I've been coming here, since I was a boy. A pause. Never heard one of them speak before. He didn't say it with outrage or admiration, just with the neutral register of someone who has witnessed something that doesn't fit the categories they have available, and has decided simply to note it. Makes you think, he added. Then he went back to watching the palace. And so did I. Corporal Bellew, as of this writing, remains on administrative reassignment. No further public statement from him has emerged. His family have declined to speak to media. A small number of veterans groups have issued letters in his support, and a considerably larger number of royal commentators have issued varying degrees of criticism, ranging from mild disappointment to calls for exemplary disciplinary action to preserve the integrity of the ceremonial guard. None of them, as far as I can tell, have directly addressed the 4 words themselves. The commitment was made to the public. Maybe because addressing the words means addressing the question inside them, and that's a harder conversation than disciplining the man who asked it. There's something about the household division, the palace guards, the bearskin hats, the famous stillness, that the public has always found fascinating, and I think the fascination runs deeper than spectacle. We are drawn to them because they represent something we recognize but rarely see embodied so purely, the idea of duty without self, of presence without demand, of service that asks nothing and explains nothing. When one of them speaks, it disrupts something, but it also reveals something, because the disruption only works if we were already treating them as objects rather than people. And the revelation is simply this, that they are people, with histories and grandfathers and thoughts, and apparently on one cold Tuesday morning, a 4-word opinion about a promise that was made to the public and then quietly set aside. Marcus Bellew didn't change the monarchy. He didn't alter Camilla's title. He didn't start a movement or end a tradition. He did something smaller and in a strange way, more enduring. He reminded everyone watching, the tourists, the journalists, the woman with the thermos, the man in tweed, the 3 million viewers who watched 9 seconds of footage on a Tuesday afternoon, that these stone-faced figures standing guard outside the most famous palace on earth are not statues. They are watching us too, and occasionally, just occasionally, they have something to say.